The wind bit into my cheeks like 1,000 needles as I trudged through snow piled nearly to my knees. The thermometer outside my workshop had read 17 degrees below freezing, but out here on the ridge, the air felt even colder. I am Elias Mercer, 70 years old, and I had just walked nearly half a mile through a roaring whiteout toward the warm glow of my son's home, a place where I believed family still meant something. If you're listening to this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from. My furnace had died an hour earlier. A doomed old machine that coughed, rattled, and finally surrendered during the worst storm our town of Hawthorne Ridge, Vermont had seen in more than 2 decades. Inside my cottage, the temperature had plummeted to near refrigerator levels. At my age, that kind of cold is not a mere inconvenience. It is a gamble with a body that has fewer reserves than pride would ever admit. Still, I had options. A modest roadside and a mile east might have had rooms. My neighbor, Mrs. Leland, had always said her guest room was open to me. But my son's house, Mark's house, only 6 blocks away, felt like the only place I should go. The place where a father ought to be welcomed without hesitation. And perhaps, deep down, I needed to know something I had ignored for years. The wind curled around the eaves of Mark's grand cedar and stone colonial, the kind of house that announces its success before anyone steps inside. Amber light spilled through the wide front windows. I could hear laughter, clinking glasses, the murmur of well-fed people discussing comfortable things. I knocked. The laughter quieted. Footsteps approached, halted, then the door cracked open just enough for warm air to brush my face before being snatched away by the storm. "Dad!" Mark's voice carried a strange tension, one I had learned too well in recent years, the sound of someone preparing an excuse. He glanced over his shoulder into the house before leaning his body forward to block the view behind him. "What are you doing here? Did something happen?" "My heat's out," I said, breath trembling in the cold. "I need a place to stay until morning." Behind him, I heard a woman's voice, clipped, polished, and unmistakably irritated. "Elena, my daughter-in-law, the one who considered image a full-time occupation." "Mark," she hissed, "you cannot let him in like that. Not tonight." I heard the word that very clearly. Mark swallowed. His eyes avoided mine. "Dad, we're hosting a dinner. Important people for Elena's design firm. She's trying to land a massive project. Timing is terrible." I looked down at my clothes, my thick canvas work coat, lined flannel shirt, insulated boots dusted with snow. Clothes I had worn for 40 years building Mercer Applied Technologies, a business I founded in my barn and sold for more than $4 million when most men my age were downsizing their dreams. But to Elena, I looked like a relic. A maintenance man. A complication. "Mark," she whispered sharply behind the door, "he will confuse the guests. Just send him somewhere else." The wind howled. Snow stung my eyes. "Dad, maybe the inn?" Mark said weakly. "We'll pay for it. Just tonight. Please." It was the please that did it. Not kindness, desperation. Desperation to keep me out of sight. "Son," I said quietly, "it's 17 degrees below freezing." His jaw tightened. "You've always figured things out yourself." That sentence, that quiet, cowardly sentence, closed the door. Literally, because he shut it. The click of the lock was sharp enough to hear over the storm. For a long moment, I stood there in the swirling white, staring at the grain of the door where my son had been. For 5 years, I had watched him and Elena live a life funded by something they believed was a stroke of inheritance luck or cleverly performing investments. Funds that appeared every month without fail. Funds they had never asked about. Funds I had provided. Every 15th of the month, $8,000 moved from a private family trust into their joint account. In total, over 5 years, that added up to more than $480,000. Nearly $500,000 to make their life easier. And my return on that investment was a closed door in a blizzard. The irony was almost warm compared to the icy air. I turned away. The wind shoved me forward like a hand between my shoulder blades. The inn's neon sign flickered faintly to the east, and I started walking. One step, then another. And with each step, something shifted inside me. something long overdue. Mark believed I always figured things out myself. By morning, he would finally learn what it felt like to do the same. By the time I reached the inn, my fingers felt like stiff branches. The clerk, a young man who looked barely old enough to rent a car, glanced at my frost-coated jacket and worn boots and offered a sympathetic frown. "Sir, if you're looking for emergency shelter, the community hall opened a warming center tonight. Even strangers saw work clothes and assumed struggle." "I'll take a room," I said, handing him a credit card, preferably one with functioning heat. He blinked, nodded, and charged me $246, the storm rate they applied whenever the town turned white and dangerous. I didn't argue. I sat on the bed, the unfamiliar sterility of the room settling around me, and tried to coax warmth back into my hands. Eventually, color returned to my fingers, and with it, the full weight of what had just happened. But the truth was, this moment wasn't born in the storm. The pattern had begun 5 years earlier, the year Mark married Elena. Back then, she had been a bright, ambitious interior designer who believed deeply, perhaps too deeply, in the power of image. Within a month of the wedding, I sensed a shift in Mark. He had always been practical, grounded, comfortable in a modest life. But with Elena came conversations about presenting well and living at the level of opportunity you want to attract. Those words were hers, not his. Their first home, a cozy, 2-bedroom townhouse on Willow Lane, suddenly felt, as Elena put it, embarrassingly transitional. She insisted they needed something more polished, more impressive, something that matched the clients she hoped to court. So they bought the sprawling lakefront house on Birchwood Summit Drive, just over $900,000. Mark's salary as a regional logistics coordinator was respectable, but not remotely enough for a house like that. Yet somehow, magically, the finances worked. And that magic came from me. Not because they asked, not because they expected, but because in those early days I wanted to help. I wanted to watch my son start life with fewer obstacles than I had faced. My own rise had been slow, messy, built on late nights in my barn writing code while my breath fogged in the winter cold. The eventual sale of Mercer Applied Technologies had given me comfort I never sought but accepted with gratitude. I created the Mercer Family Trust not as a reward, but as a cushion, something to support the next generation quietly, respectfully, without strings. So on the 15th of every month, $8,000 moved into Mark and Elena's account. Automatically, without explanation. The gift was meant to give them room to breathe. But over time, breath became entitlement. Their new house filled quickly, custom hardwoods, an Italian stone entryway, bespoke light fixtures Elena said, would set the perfect tone for entertaining. Mark nodded along, still adjusting to the world he'd married into. Then came the cars. Elena declared her old sedan a poor representation of her brand, so suddenly a sleek electric luxury SUV appeared in their driveway. Then a second car for Mark, something sportier, something that looked more like someone climbing the ladder rather than holding it steady for others. But the most painful transformation wasn't the spending. It was how I slowly disappeared. It started subtly. Little comments during family gatherings. "Elias," Elena would say lightly, diplomatically, "have you ever considered updating your wardrobe? Something more aligned with your stature." My stature. She didn't know the first thing about it. I wore my flannel shirts and durable jackets because they were familiar, honest, because they reminded me of the years I fought to build something from nothing. Elaine, my late wife, always said, "Clothes don't make the man, but they make him comfortable if he chooses them for that reason alone." Elena never understood that sentiment. To her, comfort was a sign of complacency. Soon, Mark began offering quiet suggestions too, though his voice always carried the guilt of a man caught between worlds. "Dad, Elena found a great tailor in town. Maybe we could go sometime." I'd always smile politely, but something in him deflated each time, and something in me did too. Then came the social distancing, not the kind mandated by circumstance, but the kind enforced by embarrassment. Dinner parties where my invitation never arrived. Events described after the fact as just a small gathering, nothing formal. Nights I saw their windows glowing with life, laughter echoing faintly through the air, while I sat in my cottage with a cup of tea, pretending not to notice. One night, I even overheard Elena tell a neighbor, "Oh, Mark's father keeps odd hours. He's still transitioning into retirement and puttering with projects." Projects. She meant my consultancy work, the modest, fulfilling work I still did for mid-sized manufacturers who valued systems built before cloud-based solutions replaced craftsmanship with buzzwords. Elena didn't understand that world. Worse, she didn't respect it, and Mark didn't correct her. But the clearest sign came at a Thanksgiving dinner, when I drove to their house with a pie recipe my wife had perfected decades before. Elena greeted me at the door, her expression tight. "Oh, Elias, could you maybe come through the side entrance? We've already seated everyone, and I don't want to disrupt the flow." Disrupt the flow. I stood there holding a warm pie, the scent of cinnamon drifting upward, and realized the flow she meant was her imagined narrative of refinement. Their lives swelled with things, curated art, imported linens, artisan countertops. Yet mine shrank into the margins, where practicality was mistaken for poverty, and humility was mistaken for insignificance. But the most shocking part? They genuinely believed their prosperity was self-made. Elena bragged often about how our investments have been performing exceptionally well, smiling in that confident way of someone who believes good fortune is proof of good decisions. Mark echoed her words at neighborhood gatherings, chatting about strategic allocations and long-term yield. I said nothing. I could have shown them the trust documents. I could have revealed the ledger of $500,000 that had flowed into their lives. But I chose silence, partly out of curiosity, partly out of naivety, and partly out of hope. Misguided as it was, that gratitude might sprout on its own if given space. But did not. Entitlement grows faster than appreciation when the soil is rich and the gardener inattentive. And so, when Mark closed the door on me during that storm, what froze wasn't just my fingers or my breath. It was the last fragment of illusion I'd held about my place in their world. As I lay beneath the inn's heavy quilt, my body warming slowly, I knew the storm had not merely exposed a furnace failure. It had exposed a family failure. A failure I had funded. A failure I now planned to confront, not with anger, but with clarity. By morning, I resolved to call my longtime attorney, Harold Lansing, the man who had helped structure the Mercer family trust all those years ago. And by evening, I would know exactly what options lay before me, and what consequences Mark and Elena would soon face. Because if my son believed he could tell me to figure it out myself, then perhaps it was time he learned how that felt. I woke in the gray hush of morning, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of industrial detergent and loneliness. The storm had weakened, but a hard frost coated the inn's windows like white watercolor. My body felt heavy, drained, as though the previous night had scraped something out of me that warmth alone couldn't restore. I swung my legs over the edge of the bed and reached for my boots, wincing as a dull ache throbbed through my fingers. They were still stiff, still tinged with a faint bruised hue. Not frostbite, thank heaven, but farther along that road than any 70-year-old should wander. I needed this documented. I called Dr. Evelyn Marchand, my longtime physician, a woman who ran her small practice out of a faded brick building overlooking the old railway. She'd patched me up through decades of strained shoulders, careless cuts from tools, and the occasional bout of stubborn pneumonia. "Elias?" Her voice crackled through the line, warm as sunlight through old windows. "What's happened?" "Some hypothermia. Mild, I think. I spent too long outside during the blizzard." "How long?" "Long enough." She didn't push. She never pushed. "Come in as soon as we open. I want your vitals, your core temperature, and a complete report." After hanging up, I dressed slowly, every motion deliberate. My body felt older than it had the day before. Not in years, but in experience. There's a particular heaviness that comes from realizing you were mistaken about someone you love. A weight that settles in the sternum and refuses to move. At the front desk, the clerk glanced up. "Rough night." "Enlightening," I said, and stepped out into the bitter morning air. Dr. Marchand's nurse ushered me into an exam room, the radiator clanking in protest beneath the window. 30 minutes later, I held a printed report documenting my condition. Core temp dangerously low, early stage hypothermia, risk of severe complications had I stayed outdoors any longer. Who left you out in that cold, Elias? Dr. Marchand asked quietly as she signed the papers. My son, I said simply. Her pen paused. Intentionally enough. There was no judgment in her eyes, only sorrow. Keep those records safe. I intend to. I tucked them into the leather folio I had carried through countless business meetings in my younger days. The same folio I'd brought when negotiating the sale of Mercer Applied Technologies. Somehow, it felt fitting that the same tool would hold evidence of a different kind of negotiation. From the doctor's office, I drove toward Northbrook Towers, the sleek, glass office complex where Mark worked as an operations manager. It was an impulse, but a deliberate one. I didn't want to wait for him to reach out. Last night deserved daylight clarity. Northbrook's lobby smelled of citrus polish and ambition. Young professionals hurried through, clutching laptops and insulated coffee tumblers. I approached the receptionist. I'm here to see Mark Mercer. She checked her digital board. 14th floor. Do you have an appointment? No, but he'll see me. She hesitated, then pressed a button. Go on up. The elevator hummed as it climbed, reflecting my tired expression in its mirrored walls. My reflection looked older than I remembered, not because the years had finally caught up, but because disappointment had. When I stepped into Mark's open concept office, he was laughing with two coworkers, bent over something on his monitor. His laughter stopped the second he saw me. Dad! His tone shifted instantly, polite, cautious, a man caught unprepared. We need to talk, I said. He rose quickly, glancing toward his colleagues, who suddenly found other tasks to busy themselves. Can we maybe step outside? There's a lounge near the elevators. No, here's fine. He swallowed. All right. What happened last night? Color rose in his cheeks. Dad, we talked about this. It was just terrible timing, Dash. You told me to figure it out myself. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. He looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention he assumed we were gathering. But no one was watching. No one but him cared enough to be embarrassed. I'm sorry, he said, though even he didn't sound convinced. But Elena's clients were important. She's trying to secure a huge contract. You showing up like that. Like a man dressed in practicality, not pretense. My jaw tightened. And what impression does it give when a son turns away his father during a deadly storm? That isn't fair, Mark whispered. Fair! I withdrew the hypothermia report from my folio and placed it on his desk. This is fair. Medical documentation. Your decision had consequences. His face drained of color. He lifted the paper as though it were fragile. Dad, this says you could have Dash, yes. I didn't know. I didn't think Dash. That's the problem, Mark. You did not think. You were too busy managing appearances to notice the reality outside your door. He sank slowly into his chair, elbows on his knees. Dad, why didn't you go to the inn first? I walked to your house because you're my family. He said nothing, and because I needed to understand where I stood. Silence stretched between us. Then I asked the question I had been waiting years to ask. Mark, do you know where your monthly income comes from? He blinked. The investments. The fund you set up years ago. What investments? Whatever portfolio was passed down, the long-term growth allocations. A faint bitterness rolled through me. You have never once asked, have you? His voice cracked. Dad, I thought you wanted it that way. I shook my head. No, Mark, I wanted you to wonder, to show curiosity, to show gratitude, even quietly. You did none of those things. He swallowed hard, finally truly seeing me, or seeing the space between us. And what if, I asked softly, those funds stopped? He stared at me as if the question itself were unthinkable. Stop. Yes. If the monthly transfer ended. What then? Dad, is this a threat? No. It's a hypothetical. One you should contemplate. He rubbed his forehead. Dad, the mortgage, Elena's business, our Dash, your lifestyle. I finished. A lifestyle you built on a foundation you never inspected. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, struggling for words. Think carefully about what stability truly means, Mark, I said as I turned to leave. We will talk soon. My steps were steady as I exited Northbrook Towers. My breath fogged the air, but the cold outside felt gentler than the chill I'd felt when Mark closed his door on me the night before. Later that afternoon, I drove to Lansing and Whitaker, the law firm occupying the 12th floor of a brick building overlooking the frozen river. The lobby was quiet, filled with deep leather chairs and framed photographs of local landmarks, the kind that signal understated influence. Harold Lansing rose as I entered his office, his silver hair neatly combed, his glasses perched on the edge of his nose. "Elias," he said, extending his hand, "you sounded troubled on the phone." "Seat." I did, and told him. Everything. The storm, the door, the humiliation, the medical report, the blind entitlement built on $500,000 of silent generosity. Harold listened without interruption, except to refill my cup with steaming Earl Grey from a porcelain pot he kept for long meetings. When I finished, he opened a file drawer and withdrew a thick binder, the Mercer Family Trust in all its carefully structured detail. "Elias," he said gently, "you remain the sole trustee. You have full discretion. Distributions can be altered, reduced, or eliminated entirely. Effective immediately." "Immediate," I repeated. "Yes. And if I choose to end support, then the funds stay in the trust, or you may reallocate them as you see fit. Another beneficiary, a charitable endowment, an educational fund, whatever aligns with your values." Values. The word struck deeper than expected. In the past 5 years, Mark and Elena had not once asked about mine. "Harold," I said quietly, "prepare everything. Letters, documentation, all required notices. But hold off executing until I decide." He nodded. "Take your time, Elias. But not too much. Some decisions curdle when left sitting." I closed the binder and sat back, feeling something shift. Not anger, not vengeance, but clarity. A clarity winter storms are uniquely good at revealing. Leaving Harold Lansing's office, I felt an unexpected sense of equilibrium. The kind of man reaches after finally naming the truth he has avoided for too long. Clarity can be colder than any winter wind, but it is far more honest. And honesty, I'd learned through decades of mentorship, leadership, and fatherhood, is the only compass that never cracks under pressure. Across from the law firm stood Riverside Private Banking, where Mara Ellington, my long-trusted wealth manager, had overseen my accounts since before the Mercer Applied Technologies sale. She was patient, meticulous, and one of the few people I considered a genuine steward of the life I had built. I walked through the glass doors, the warm air carrying a faint cedar scent. "Mr. Mercer," she greeted me with genuine warmth, "I didn't expect to see you today. I'm reviewing the family trust." Her expression shifted to professional focus. "Of course. Let's talk in my office." The office overlooked the frozen river, where chunks of ice drifted like fractured memories. Mara logged into her secure terminal and turned the monitor slightly toward me. "The Mercer Family Trust has maintained steady performance," she said. "Distribution to the primary beneficiary, your son, is $8,000 monthly. Transfers have been exact, uninterrupted for 5 years. Has he ever asked about the source?" "No," she said softly. "Never. Most beneficiaries inquire regularly. Your son never even requested portfolio updates." A sadness stirred in me, not new, but heavier now that I'd acknowledged its origin. "What would happen," I asked, "if distributions ceased?" "The trust would continue earning. Funds would grow. Beneficiary notice would be sent, certified mail, with documented rationale, as required by law. But practically speaking, their lifestyle would change drastically, instantly." I considered this while watching the river outside, the ice shifting along currents indifferent to human worries. "Prepare a full audit," I said. 5 years. Every transfer. Every record." She nodded. "You'll have everything by tomorrow." Before leaving, I added, "Mara, thank you. You've always been honest with me." "Honesty is easier when clients value it," she replied. I wondered, not for the first time, whether my son valued it at all. By mid-afternoon, as I sat in my small cottage with a mug of black tea warming my hands, my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. Dad, Elena wants to invite you to dinner this Sunday. She wants to make things right. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder. That word nestled into me with the quiet irritation of a stone in a shoe. Hard for whom? Certainly not for the man who had been left outside in sub-zero wind. Still, I typed a measure response. I'll be there. 6 o'clock? His reply came instantly. Yes. And Dad, maybe consider wearing something a bit more presentable? Elena suggested that clothing might ease the tension. Clothing. It always came back to appearance. I stared at the message for a long time, then quietly set the phone down. I had spent a lifetime being judged by the quality of my work, the reliability of my character, the systems I built with my hands and mind. Yet my own daughter-in-law believed a different jacket would solve a fracture she had chiseled herself. I would wear what I always wore, not to provoke, but because truth should never need a costume. That evening, while sorting old paperwork in my workshop, my phone rang again. The name on the caller ID surprised me. Charles Weatherford, a former business partner from the earlier days of my company, a man whose manufacturing outfit had adopted one of my earliest database engines. We hadn't spoken in years, but mutual respect does not expire. Elias, he said, his voice still carrying that steady confidence I had always admired. I heard about the mess the other night. I paused. What exactly did you hear? That Elena seemed distressed when someone arrived mid-dinner and that there was talk about family tensions. But today, well, someone let slip that it was you who had been turned away. The embarrassment that should have been Elena's rested instead in his voice, and that told me everything. Mark and Elena were entertaining some of Elena's potential clients, I said simply. His tone darkened. That explains the polished dance they were doing. But turning away your father, especially you, Elias, that's a different sort of behavior. He exhaled heavily. You built half the systems our company still uses. My family owes you more gratitude than I can express. But your son? He doesn't know. No, I said. He doesn't. Charles was quiet for a long moment. Patricia and I were considering hiring Elena for a major redesign. That is no longer the plan. I didn't respond. It wasn't my place to steer another family's decisions. Elias, he added gently, if you ever want consulting work again, real work with real value, call me. We'd be honored to have your expertise. I thanked him and ended the call, my chest heavy with the contrast, strangers who respected me, while my own son treated me like a burden in need of cosmetic upgrades. By Sunday evening, the storm had passed, leaving a crystalline sheen across Hawthorne Ridge. I dressed in my usual clothes, a dark flannel shirt, well-worn denim, and my old insulated work coat. They were clean, neat, and honest. That was enough. I arrived at Mark and Elena's house precisely at 6. Warm light spilled from the windows again. The same golden glow that had once promised warmth, now only reminding me of that frigid night. Elena answered the door. Her smile was thin, stretched like fabric pulled too tight. Elias, she said, thank you for coming. Inside, the Weatherfords, impeccably dressed, sat in the living room, sipping wine. Elena ushered me in with careful choreography, as though trying to conceal my presence rather than welcome it. This is Mark's father, Elias Mercer, she said. He's good with practical things. Very handy. Practical. Handy. Another small cut layered atop 5 years of them. Charles rose to shake my hand, polite, warm, but not yet recognizing me beyond the surface impression Elena had drawn. Pleasure to meet you, he said. Elena's told us you're quite resourceful. I nodded, letting the moment breathe. I did not rescue Elena. She had made her bed, a velvet one, upholstered to her taste, and she would lie in it. I took my seat on a slightly separated armchair, carefully positioned to keep me near yet apart. Elena launched into her practice pitch about the Weatherford's renovation project. She unfurled design boards across the coffee table, her eyes glowing with anticipatory pride. But Patricia Weatherford, sharper than most gave her credit for, studied me more than the marble samples. Something in her gaze softened, or perhaps sharpened. "Elena," she said, "you mentioned Elias built his own business years ago. What kind of business was it?" Before Elena could mold the truth to her liking, I answered, "Software engineering. I founded Mercer Applied Technologies." Charles froze. Slowly, recognition dawned. "Mercer Applied? Elias Mercer?" His voice broke into astonishment. "The man who built our entire inventory architecture nearly 30 years ago." Elena's face drained of color, as if someone had pulled the plug on her composure. The moment had arrived, not of my making, but of truth's. And truth had perfect timing. Charles stared at me, as if I had stepped out of a portrait from his company's historical lobby wall. Someone important, someone foundational, someone whose absence he had felt without knowing why. "Elena," he said slowly, still looking at me, "you told us Elias did. What kind of work?" Her voice trembled. I said he's skilled with hands-on tasks and helps around town sometimes." "Helps around town?" Charles repeated, his brow lifting. "Elias, forgive me, but you're the same Mercer who built the framework that saved our production line in the early 90s? "Yes," I said quietly. "I am." A silence fell across the room, thick, rigid, transformative. Patricia set down her wine, her eyes sharpening with dawning understanding. "Elena," she said, "you introduced your father-in-law, the founder of Mercer Applied Technologies, as someone who does handyman work." Elena's face paled, but she forced a brittle smile. "I didn't think it mattered for tonight's meeting. I was trying to keep the focus on the renovation. Titles and past achievements can complicate things socially." "Past achievements?" Charles muttered. "His work is still the backbone of our infrastructure." Mark, who had until now remained behind the kitchen island, stepped closer, face drained. "Dad," he whispered, you never said the company was worth." "I did not hide it, Mark. You simply never asked." Something in that sentence hit him harder than any scolding could. His shoulders sank, and a quiet shame settled in his posture. Patricia looked between the three of us, her voice growing cool. "Elena, do you not understand what it means to treat a man like this, especially one who built something that changed industries?" "I didn't mean anything by it," Elena insisted. "It was just social management. I didn't want our clients to feel clients." Charles cut in. "Is that all you saw when Elias came to your door during a storm? A threat to your image? Not a human being? Not family?" The room held its breath. I spoke softly. "They left me outside during a blizzard 5 days ago. I walked half a mile through snowdrifts after my heating failed. I knocked on their door because I thought the bond between a father and son outweighed inconvenience." Patricia covered her mouth. Her eyes shimmered. "You left him outside?" she whispered to Elena. "Only for a moment, Elena began. "A moment too long," Patricia snapped. "My goodness, he could have collapsed." I withdrew the folded medical report from my coat. "This," I said, placing on the coffee table, "is the assessment from my doctor. Mild hypothermia. Had I stayed out longer, the result would have been far worse." Charles leaned in. When he finished reading, he sat back like a man who had just witnessed a crime. "Elena," he said slowly, "your firm will not be receiving our renovation contract." She gasped. "But this situation has nothing to do with my professional work." "Oh, it has everything to do with it," he said. "If you treat family as disposable, how can we trust you with something as intimate as the heart of our home? Character matters more than marble and mood boards." Patricia added, "We value empathy, loyalty, integrity." qualities you seem unfamiliar with. Elena's cheeks flushed with anger and humiliation. This is absurd. You're letting a personal misunderstanding destroy a perfectly good business arrangement. Elias is trying to make us look stop. Mark's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone froze. Mark looked at his wife. Really looked, as though seeing a portrait that had been retouched for years and was only now revealing its cracks. Elena, enough, he said softly. We can't pretend anymore. The way we treated my father that night, it was wrong. Completely wrong. She shook her head, gripping the edge of the sofa. I was thinking about the company, Elena insisted. About our future, and you didn't think about my father's safety, he said. You didn't think about the man who gave us so much. Her jaw clamped tight. What he gave us was voluntary. He never said You never asked, I said quietly. Elena glared at me, desperation tightening her features. You're doing this on purpose, she said. This whole reveal. You planned this to humiliate me. No, I said calmly. You humiliated yourself. I simply stopped protecting you from the truth. I reached into my folio again. This time, I withdrew a different set of documents, stark, official, bearing the subtle watermark of Harold Lansing's firm. These, I said, placing the envelope on the table beside the medical report, are drafts of trust modification orders. Mark's eyes widened. Dad, for 5 years, I continued, I provided $8,000 each month to support the life you built. Nearly $500,000. A life that grew more lavish as I became more invisible. Elena whispered, 8,000, yes, I said. 8,000. Every month. Without fail. She stared at Mark, betrayal warping her expression into something unrecognizable. You told me it was old family investments. You said it came from his earlier success. You never said he was still I didn't know. Mark shouted, startling even himself. I didn't know those transfers were from him. Elena pointed at me as if I were the problem. You manipulated us. You created dependency without telling us. Dependency, I repeated softly. Or entitlement? She stood sharply, her dress rustling like wings of a trapped bird. You can't just take it away, she snapped. You can't destroy everything we built. I'm not destroying anything, I replied. I'm simply refusing to fund disrespect. Charles nodded thoughtfully. Well said. Patricia added, a home built on someone else's dignity is not a home. It is a stage. Elena swayed slightly, her composure fracturing. For the first time, she seemed small, almost fragile, a woman whose identity had been erected from appearances like scaffolding around an unfinished building. Mark, she whispered urgently, do something. He stared at her for a long, quiet moment. Then he looked at me. Dad, I am so sorry, he said, voice trembling. I should have asked more questions. I should have protected you. I should have been your son. The sincerity in his voice wasn't enough to undo years of neglect, but it was the first real thing he had said to me in a long time. I nodded. We could talk later. Just us. Elena's voice cracked with disbelief. You're taking his side? Mark exhaled. He's my father, and I'm your wife. He looked at her, really saw her, and something in his gaze grew old and tired and painfully honest. And you're someone, he said quietly, I'm just now realizing I don't fully know. Her face crumpled. The Weatherfords, sensing the gravity of what was unfolding, stood to leave. Elias, Charles said, shaking my hand with warm respect. Call me tomorrow. We have real work to discuss. Work worthy of your skill. Patricia touched my arm gently. You deserve better than this. I thanked them, and they stepped into the cold night, leaving behind only silence and the faint trail of truth lingering in the air. Elena sank onto the sofa, trembling with humiliation and anger. Mark remained standing, hands shaking, eyes glossy. And I, for the first time in many years, felt something in me settle. Not satisfaction, but certainty. Certainty that truth, once spoken aloud, is a force that reshapes everything it touches. The house was quiet after the Weatherfords left, quiet in that exposed way a stage becomes once the audience is filed out and the actors are left staring at their own shadows. Elena sat rigid on the sofa, her manicured fingers trembling against the cushion. Mark stood near the fireplace, his expression tight and conflicted, as though he were piecing together a puzzle that had been in front of him for years but only now made sense. I rose slowly from the armchair. Before I leave, I said, I want to be clear about what happens next. Elena's head snapped toward me. You can't make decisions like this when emotions are running high. You're upset, and I understand that. But you can't just take away nearly $500,000 of support. You didn't warn us. You didn't dash. Elena, I interrupted. The door closed on me in a blizzard. That was warning enough. She flinched. A faint gasp escaped her lips, but she regained her composure quickly, clinging to indignation as if it were a life raft. You're punishing us, she insisted. You're using your money as leverage because we didn't behave exactly how you wanted. I met her gaze. I'm not punishing you. I am choosing standards for how I let myself be treated. Mark rubbed his temples. Dad, please. We can fix this. We can talk it out. Elena didn't mean dash, she did, I said softly. And so did you. That night, when you told me to figure it out yourself, you meant every word. He winced. I was nervous, Dad. I panicked. Elena's clients meant a lot to her. And dash, and so your father meant less. The room held that truth in its palms, heavy, undeniable. Elena rose abruptly, pacing with unsteady footsteps. You're going to ruin our lives, she whispered, voice trembling not with fear of wrongdoing, but fear of consequence. Our home, our business, our position in this community, all gone because of one misunderstanding. One, I repeated quietly. This was not one. This was years of small cuts, each ignored until the wound finally bled. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Even she knew there was no defense sturdy enough to hold back the truth of accumulated disrespect. I reached for my coat. The trust distributions end immediately, I said. You will receive written confirmation within the week. Elena's voice cracked into sharpness. You can't just cut us off like we're nothing. I straightened my coat collar. People who treat someone like nothing, I replied, should be prepared to feel what nothing is like. Mark inhaled sharply. Elena sank onto the sofa again, stunned. And with that, I opened the door to leave. The cold night air met me with a kind of honest bite, the sort that tells the truth quickly. I stepped out, hearing the muffled beginnings of an argument behind me, their voices rising like a storm of their own making. As I walked down their meticulously lit stone path, I felt the first true shift in years, a reclaiming of dignity that had been chipped away too slowly to notice until it was almost gone. 2 days later, on Monday morning, I received a call from Mara Ellington. The trust modification is complete, Mr. Mercer, she reported. Certified notices have been mailed to Mark and Elena. The February 15th distribution is canceled. All future transfers suspended. I thanked her. 5 minutes after the call ended, my phone rang again. This time it was Mark. Dad. His voice was strained, frayed at the edges. We got a letter from the bank. They want to discuss our income documentation. They said our mortgage profile is suddenly untenable. I imagine it is, I said calmly. Dad, please. Without the monthly, without the $8,000, we can't sustain the payments on the house. I know, and you're okay with that? No, I said, but I'm no longer willing to pretend stability built on silence is real stability. He exhaled shakily. Dad, we could lose everything. Then you will rebuild with what is yours, I replied. Not with what was given without gratitude. He was silent for a long moment. Then, Dad, I don't know how to explain this to Elena. You don't need to explain it, I said softly. She already knows. He hung up without saying goodbye. The next day, Tuesday, my phone rang again. Elena. She didn't bother with small talk. Elias, she said sharply. I contacted the Weatherfords. I tried to correct the misunderstanding you caused. I caused? Yes, she snapped. You ambushed us. You could have handled things privately, but instead you humiliated us in front of our most important clients. I almost laughed at the irony. Elena, I said, if telling the truth is an ambush, perhaps the battlefield is one you build. She ignored the comment. They still canceled the contract, she said. Do you understand how catastrophic that is for my firm? They said it was about ethics and character perception. That's nonsense. It isn't nonsense to them, I replied. And now, she pressed on, 3 other clients have pulled their projects. They're all connected socially. Word is spreading. I said nothing. You need to fix this, she demanded. I blinked. Fix it. Yes. Talk to them. Explain that you misunderstood me. Tell them you weren't thinking clearly after the storm. Elena, I said evenly, they made their decision based on your behavior, not mine. Her breath caught. You're destroying my business. No, I said. You are. She hung up on me. By Thursday, word had spread through Hawthorne Ridge, though discreetly, as affluent communities often do. People at the hardware store glanced at me with curious sympathy. A couple at the cafe whispered my name. These weren't cruel whispers. They were whispers of recognition. Whispers of a truth that had finally surfaced. Late that afternoon, my landline rang. This is Martin Caldwell, the manager of Hawthorne Ridge Country Club said. Mr. Mercer, the board asked me to reach out to you. We heard about certain events. We want you to know your standing with the club remains unquestioned. You are one of our longest and most respected members. I sighed. I didn't know my standing was at risk. It isn't, he assured me. But sometimes gossip travels faster than facts. We wanted to make sure you heard from us directly. I appreciated that more than he knew. Martin, I said, I may have some ideas for improving the club's reservation system. The current one is outdated. He laughed. We were wondering when you'd offer. We'd love to hire you for consulting. Consulting. Real work. Honest work. Work done by someone Elena believed was only good with hands-on tasks. Friday evening, I heard a car door slam in my driveway. Elena. She marched up my path, her coat wrapped tightly around her, her eyes fiery with desperation. I opened the door before she could knock. We need to talk, she said sharply. Come in, he replied. She stepped inside, scanning my modest living room as if trying to understand how a man who lived so simply could wield so much quiet influence. For the first time, I felt not pity, but the beginning of distance. Distance from someone who had shaped our family's downfall with a careless hand. "Goodbye, Elena," I said. She whispered a single word, a word that suddenly revealed the entire truth of her world. "Please." But I ended the call, not out of cruelty, out of necessity. On Monday morning, 8 days after the dinner party, I received a call I had been expecting, though not because I wished for it. "Dad," Mark said. His voice sounded older. Not in years, but in understanding. I, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "Elena and I, we're separating." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry," I said. "Even when it's the right choice, it's still painful." "It is," he admitted. "But I finally saw who she was, or maybe who she always was. And I saw who I was letting myself become." "And who is that?" I asked gently. "A man ashamed of the wrong person," he said. "A man living a life he didn't earn. A man who let image blind him to integrity." His voice broke slightly. "I don't want to be that man, Dad." For the first time in years, I heard not defensiveness, not pride, not confusion, but clarity. "Mark," I said, "that is the first time you've spoken like my son in a very long time." When the call ended, I sat quietly at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea that had long since cooled. Outside, the last remnants of the storm still clung to the edges of rooftops and window ledges, though the sky had opened into a soft, forgiving blue, the kind that arrives only after a night that nearly broke you. I thought of Mark as a boy, his hair sticking up after long hours building forts in the backyard, his face always smudged with dirt and pride. He had once asked me, at the age of 8, "Dad, how do you know if you did the right thing?" "You feel lighter afterward," I told him. And now, decades later, he finally sounded lighter. That mattered more than any monthly transfer, any house on a hill, or any illusion of prosperity crafted to impress people who would forget your name the moment you left the room. In the days that followed, Mark moved out of the Birchwood house. He rented a humble 2-bedroom apartment in Maple Terrace, a modest complex overlooking the river. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest, the first honest space he'd lived in since marrying Elena. One afternoon, he invited me over. For the first time in years, he didn't seem like a man frantically climbing a ladder made of borrowed rungs. He was wearing plain denim and a simple navy sweater. He greeted me with a hug, a real one, not the polite, stiff gestures Elena preferred during holidays. "Dad," he said softly, "thank you for letting me fall far enough to see how high I pretended to be." "It wasn't about letting you fall," I said. "It was about letting truth rise." We share a meal, nothing fancy, just warm stew and fresh bread from the bakery. But the simplicity was a kind of richness Elena had never understood. There were no curated plates, no imported wines, no staged centerpieces. Just conversation. Just us. Late in the afternoon, as the sun dipped low and brushed the apartment walls with amber, Mark asked a question I felt he had been carrying for years. "Dad, will you ever trust me again with family money?" I looked at him carefully, at the man he finally seemed willing to become. "Mark," I said slowly, "wealth is not measured by what you have, but by who you choose to be when you have nothing." He nodded, eyes thoughtful. "When you can carry your own life with steadiness," I continued, "and still choose to lift someone else's, then we will talk again about what legacy means." He accepted that fully, humbly, gratefully. For the first time in a long time, I walked away from him feeling something new. Hope, not for what he could inherit, but for what he could become. As spring settled over Hawthorne Ridge, I found myself walking more often, not to escape anything, but to appreciate what remained. My life was quieter now, yet fuller in ways wealth alone could never measure. The consulting work, the scholarship fund, the steady reconnection with my son, All of it reminded me that legacy is not the money we pass down, but the character we pass forward. And as I watched Mark rebuild his life with honest footing, I finally understood. Sometimes the greatest gift a father can give is truth.